Do you ever feel old when you remind yourself that something you bought many years ago is now a lot more expensive today? I'm going to give you a couple of examples that I can think of in my own life. The first one, when I was really small, I remember in our really small town, we would ride our bikes to a small grocery store, and I could buy a piece of gum for 3 cents or 5 cents, just an individual piece of bubble gum. And now I don't even think that you can buy them in a store individually, and if you can, it's around 25 cents. So the cost of that then versus now has obviously increased. Another example is when I started driving. I remember it was a big deal when gas was going to go over $1, and it kind of hovered around that dollar range per gallon. It'd be 90 cents or $1. And that was a big deal. Fast forward to today, $1.50, $2, $3, $4, depending on what year you're choosing, that's normal. And so I want to explain a concept called inflation or cost of living adjustments. And this is really just telling us that the cost of something today in the future will likely go up. And it may not affect every single thing that you buy. However, at somewhere in your budget or somewhere in your expenses, you're going to notice that expenses are increasing. And so we need to factor this in. So when we're creating a financial plan for someone, we want to factor that the cost of everything you're spending today will go up in the future. And at least to be conservative, we need to put that in there. So I'm just going to use a rate that we see today, 2% of inflation. So we're just going to use 2% in these examples. And what I'm going to show you is at different dollar amounts what this adds up to over the years. And this isn't meant to scare you, but just to show you that sometimes we think, well, if I spend $50,000 today and when I'm retired, I'm going to be retired for 20 years, so 50,000 times 20 years, that's how much I need to save. However, you're completely ignoring inflation and the cost of those expenses going higher. So this is something you just need to be mindful of, and don't forget to include when you're planning. So the example that I have here, this is the inflation of $1 over the course of years. In this column we have $50,000, and in this one $100,000. And so what I want to show you now is that in the first year, today I have $1. In 1 year, the cost of that dollar increasing by 2%. So now next year it costs me $1.02 to get that same thing. Or if I spent 50, now it costs me 51,000 to spend that same amount of money. So you can see how 100, 102. And this is what I'm trying to get you to understand is when we see the dollar and we say, that's great, it goes up by 2%, $1 becomes $1.81. It doesn't really impact us much. But now, when we fast forward and we say, okay, but 10 years out, because we spend more than $1, we're spending 50 or 100, now that really starts to add up. So this row right here, you can see 10 years out, you can see that $1 is now $1.22. Or now it's 60,000 instead of 50, 120 instead of 100. So now we start to see this actually does add up. In this column, this row here, you can see 20 years out, and then here you can see 30. And so here, by our timeline of years, we can see that these numbers really add up. Now, this is important because some of us may say, I'm starting now and I may work for another 20 or 30 years, and then I'm going to be retired for 20 or 30 years after that. At least that's what is in my plan. So now we can see we're adding these up. We're not only stopping at 30 years, but there's more beyond this. And obviously there are going to be years where maybe it's less, maybe it's more. And so this is just what we know today. And now that once you get past 40 plus years after this, now that original amount has doubled. And so now beyond 40 years, the amount that we're spending today is now doubled in amount. So this is a really important factor. Inflation, you may hear it. That's a big term that's talked about and why it's important. Cost of living adjustments. And these are just words that maybe you don't understand what they mean. So putting them into this context, now you can understand how it's important to you. Now you may be a person that says, you know what, this doesn't really affect me. If I spend $50,000 today, I can make adjustments in my budget. I can spend less, so I'm always spending 50, whatever year that is. Let me just point out kind of back to some of those examples. So, for example, food. Can you think at the grocery store certain items that you've bought over the years and how those might have increased in price? Gas is one that I mentioned. That's one that, depending on the year you're looking at. Clothing, this is one that, depending on what you buy, and this is where it's also pointing out some of these categories may not affect you as much as others. So this is where it's important to think about it and say, okay, where would this affect me and how much do I really need to be thinking about this? But if none of those affected you, what about healthcare costs? And this is just one where we don't know what we're going to need in the future, and so if nothing else, we're planning for the potential for some of these to increase, even if we're really focused to keep them the same. So I hope this is helpful to understand a concept like inflation or cost of living adjustment, just so that you're mindful when you're planning that you're not forgetting about this important piece of the plan.